Hello, everybody, and good morning. Really happy to see everybody here at this busy time of year. Appreciate you all joining us for our December installment of the Connected Wellbeing Initiative workshop series. For those of you who are new to the initiative, just a quick intro, which is this is part of a broader effort in the digital well-being space that has been supported by a group of organizations and funders who have been investing in this area for quite some time around how to foster healthy and empowered relationships to technology centered on youth, not only as a population that we're hoping to serve and support, but also, and maybe most importantly, understanding that youth are themselves probably the best carriers of the solutions in terms of creating a healthier and more positive and supportive online environment. The Connected Wellbeing Initiative is supporting 11 teams who are developing really innovative programs and organizations that have quite a diverse range of approaches, but are really united around common values of centering youth voice, agency, again, recognizing young people as the carriers of the solution, not the problems to be fixed, and as bringing unique assets and expertise, particularly young people from backgrounds with lived experiences that are often overlooked and underestimated within the worlds of technology. So you'll be hearing from three of those teams today. We'll be starting off with a really awesome group of panelists who are part of our broader community and advisors to this initiative. Uh,
Yeah, I'm understanding.
I'm getting a little bit of noise. Okay, thank you. And Yeah, this December workshop in particular is focused on the topic of how organizations, teams that are represented in our Impact Studio, but more broadly, youth serving organizations can really communicate their story and their impact. And a lot of the organizations obviously have really powerful assets because they center around youth voice and storytelling. But there's also some unique challenges in kind of telling the story about, diverse youth perspectives and young people as in the solution space in a context when the dominant narratives are very focused on a lot of the negatives, a lot of the more disempowering and adult-splainy kinds of conversations that tend to happen around youth well-being, around young people's use of technology. So some of the unique challenges in kind of communicating, whether it's to potential partners like educators or health settings or funders, or even to parents and other stakeholders in the community, what the unique value and strengths of these approaches are. So I'm very happy to have this amazing group today that will kick off the conversation, but we're hoping that this will be, as usual, a participatory kind of conversation. We'll be kicking off with sort of quick presentations, kind of level setting introductions by our three panelists. Kyra Kyles, who's a journalist, a media executive, and a CEO of YR Media. Jaspal Sandhu, who's executive vice president at Hope Lab and has a ton of experience in social impact work and health equity. Kelsey Noonan from Pivotal Ventures, who's one of the organizations supporting this initiative and has a lot of experience in partnership and philanthropic work and strategy in this space. And then after those three presentations, we'll have three of the teams from the Impact Studio who are represented here today. This Teenage Life, and we have Molly Josephs and Evelyn McKinney representing that team. I think Anna Kasame from Novelly will be presenting next, and then Nana Boateng from Teach YR, which is part of YR Media, will be doing the last presentation. Then we hope to have, at least 15, 20 minutes at the end for breakout groups and more engaged conversations with everybody at the end of this hour and a half we have together. So I am going to hand it over to Kyra to kick us off.
Okay, and I'm kicking us off with the introduction, I'm hoping. So my name is Kyra Kyles. I am currently living in Oakland and working with Wire Media, which is an amazing place. And I'm so excited we're celebrating our 30 years of providing impact right now. I'm originally from Chicago. I've been a journalist for 20 plus years, worked at Ebony, Jet, some of the historic Black-owned brands, also worked at the Tribune Company where I was a columnist, and I also have a background in communications. And so I really hope to bring to the conversation ideas and thoughts around amplifying the work that we're doing, how to make sure that youth voice is centered and that their perspective is accurately depicted when it is depicted, and that it comes from the source as it should. As someone who has worked in African American media, understanding the importance of the for us, by us, about us, model is extremely important. So that's a little bit about me, and Wire Media is a youth media organization, and we do produce across different areas of content. And so it's really exciting to be here, and thank you so much. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so maybe we'll, do a quick round robin of our featured panelists, and then we'll go back to the presentation part. So Kelsey, do you want to go next?
Sure. So excited to share this virtual room with all of you. Thank you for making time in December, knowing that it is a very busy time of year for many of us. I'm based in Seattle, Washington, although originally from upstate New York. And I am the strategy lead at Pivotal Ventures for adolescent mental health. Pivotal Ventures is a funding organization founded by Melinda French Gates in 2015 to advance social progress in the United States. We have a focus on supporting gender equity in the United States, but also on supporting the well-being of the next generation. We center a lot of our work around the lived experience of youth of color and LGBTQ plus kids and their caregivers, and really are excited about shaping a positive trajectory for this next generation's well-being. I'll get into a little bit more of how we do that and how I've come to this position, but pass it to Jaspaul to round out our intros first.
Thanks, Kelsey. Jaspaul Sandhu, use he, him pronouns. I'm Executive Vice President at Hope Lab. Hope Lab, and I've been in this role for a year and a half. We believe in a future for queer and trans young people and young people of color that is one in which they can thrive in all aspects of life, with a big focus on their mental health and well-being. And we do that a couple of different ways. One is that we support innovators out in the world, including young innovators and young leaders, echoing some of what you shared right at the top, Mimi, about the right way to do this is to find young people who already have the solutions and to not think of young people as a problem to be solved. The other side of our house is all about science. And so we believe in science. I think a lot of people in this room believe in science. And the work that we do is really trying to make science matter in the space of youth mental health. Some of that is investing in new knowledge, and some of that is helping translate knowledge from academia into the real world. My own background is as an engineer, and then I worked for many years in product design, human-centered design. For the last dozen years, I was running my own agency called Gobi that did design work and social impact. And I'm a teacher. I've been teaching in higher ed at University of California, Berkeley School of Public Health, courses that are meeting people where they're at. So I have a big interest in culture and where that can meet impact. And so some of that teaching looks like some of it's touched on food, some of it's touched on digital health, and now it's touching on art. And I'm really excited to be here with all of you today.
Thanks so much, Jaspaul, Kelsey, and Kyra. Kyra, I was wondering if we could go back to you to maybe share some of your wisdom on sort of common pitfalls that you've seen around storytelling, and maybe some advice on how to do it right.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that I touched on in the intro is that a lot of times the media is almost dismissive of certain groups of underrepresented people until they need them, so to speak, in a news cycle fashion. And so what that tends to do is it goes more into a scarcity or a negative framing. So one of the things that I try to help us avoid is talking around younger people until you need something from them, or also not providing the right scaffolds and context. So I would say, for example, there are a lot of stories right now crossing the nation about, we'll say, especially as it pertains to young people of color, negative narratives about, I'm from Chicago, so all the stories that you're seeing and hearing about youth violence in Chicago and robberies and things of that nature that are very negative. And in those stories, in the framing of those stories, you'll note that they almost rarely speak to any young person. They may speak to people that work with young people. They may speak to people who, are being framed as the victim in this situation, but they don't ever really speak to young people directly. And when they do, it's around these kind of negative narratives and framing. So what I would say is that you don't want to be feeding in negative narratives either by being reactive. You don't want to be just reacting and trying to provide this like shining golden light in a negative news cycle. So what I think has been effective is being proactive, making sure that youth voice is present at all times. And that way it is not being highlighted simply during a time of crisis or as part of another news story. I also think that it is important, of course, to try to get the voices of young people who are not commonly represented in the nation, which I think there are very obvious groups that have been excluded from some of these major narratives. I think that one of the things that's most powerful about that is that it isn't just about encouraging reporters or encouraging outlets to find and speak to young people. It's allowing and making sure that there are proper platforms for young people to have their own voice and their own perspective that is noted. And I think it is also key to remember that just as I, as a storyteller, get support from editors and helping me in terms of thinking through how I'm approaching a story, you don't want to just toss someone out there without proper preparation. Colleagues in TeachYR actually produced a white paper that talks a lot about trauma-informed journalism and the importance of letting people understand the full perspective that they're giving, what some of the ramifications may be. That doesn't mean to try to control or stop someone from telling their story the way that they want to tell it, but just letting them remember that, of course, even in this digital age, that these stories can last forever, so to speak, and are out there floating around and can be found through Google News. So you want to make sure that people understand the ramifications that could come of telling certain stories without discouraging them from telling them. The other aspect I would say is that it is important to invest in young people as reporters and storytellers, but also to invest in communications channels for them. At Wire Media, we have a communications department because we understand that though there are great things going on and that there are great stories that are being told, just putting them out into the ether and expecting them to catch fire is very unrealistic in the age of algorithms. So though some of partners that we may have may see less value in amplifying the stories than they do in just having the stories get out there, so to speak, it's really important to champion for that because it also helps with the framing. It helps you, for example, if there are stories that are trending in the zeitgeist, that you can be able to capitalize on those stories. So, for example, anti-AAPI hate. Of course, Wire Media storytellers had a lot that they wanted to say about that. And that is a way that we were able to partner with other platforms, is by bringing a unique perspective to that. Another example is our coverage of Black Lives Matter, writing essays, writing perspectives, also shedding light on, how young people are dealing with and contending with this was very helpful. But in addition to that, just general stories, elections, all the different things that are going on, and making sure that you're kind of towing that line between representation and tokenization, because that's one that people can often trip on. You don't want to be the story of the day in a way that takes away your agency. And so working with people that are emerging storytellers to make sure that they are able to skirt that line, that you're not contributing to them being set up in some kind of extractive situation, I think is really important. I'll just say a couple of ways that we've done that, just to give some concrete examples. So we worked with the Washington Post at one point on a story about teens in America, and it was about race and different framing. For example, and there was a young person who was of Ethiopian heritage and talked a lot about how the identifier of being Black was a new thing, coming to America and being treated in a certain way and finding yourself in a certain group and categorization that she may not have considered, you know, when living in Ethiopia, or her family coming from Ethiopia. That was a great storytelling partnership through the Washington Post, but we also were very adamant about how young people got to tell their stories, working with the team so that they understood that there's a certain, you know, patience, a certain perspective that needs to be brought out in certain ways. And so that was extremely successful and really allowed us a bigger platform to talk about those issues while respecting the storytellers, their narrative, and their just personal lives, because this is a very, you know, kind of touchy topic still, race in America. So that was an important story to tell. We also have worked with Futuro Media in the past, where we've discussed issues of, for example, alliances within groups of people of color. Like, how do you foster those alliances? How does someone, you know, from a different, still a person of color but not Black, support Black Lives Matter? That was another great partnership. Again, framed by, we're not just going out and tagging people to join in on a conversation. We want them to be fully informed. We want them to be fully participating in the experience. We want them to have the utmost agency so that they do not feel as though their stories were extracted from them. Because I think that's something that people who are just historically suppressed is something that we have to deal with. You know, I remember at an early stage in my career when a group of editors asked me to weigh in on whether we should call people that were affected by Hurricane Katrina refugees. And I felt that it was unfair to ask me, first of all, to speak up for all of Blackdom, as I call it. Secondly, you know, the fact that they see it in that way, you know, was interesting to me, and really, you know, had a negative effect. So I can only imagine how someone younger who may not have like the experience that I had at that time, because at that time I had, you know, years of experience under my belt. So we just have to be cognizant of those factors. So I think doing it well looks like doing it in collaboration. It looks like doing it with purpose and intentionality and thinking through possible ramifications without being limiting. And also, I think the most powerful part of it is stepping out of the way. A lot of times we think we're helping people, and we're not. You know, we're actually suppressing them. We're, you know, blocking them, when really what we want to do is be a proper collaborator. So that's something that I think is just a really important facet and a way to address those common pitfalls. It can be done. I think that, you know, Wire Media and other youth organizations that I could name, True Star Foundation, for example, out of Chicago, some others, they have proven that this can be done effectively. And I just hope that people continue to consider all those ramifications and when dealing with, you know, how to get out there, but you want to get out there the right way.
Oh, wow. Thanks so much, Cara. That was really an amazing start to the conversation and very powerful. Just a lot of what you described, those kind of tricky tensions and assumptions that a lot of people bring to this space, and how to skirt that dynamic of tokenization, which is really so common in a lot of the media outreach around this work. I really thank you, Nana, for posting some of the links, because YR's work is really exemplary in this regard, and how to center youth voice in ways that, yeah, I love stepping out of the way rather than the helping kind of mode. Really helpful framing to start off. I guess, Kelsey, would you be up for going next and sharing some of your thoughts and wisdom?
Sure. Yeah. Happy to engage. And I will pull up some visuals along with that, because I think it's an important part of the story that we have to tell. I lead our mental health work at Pivotal, but I am not a mental health expert. My background is in behavior change, understanding why people do what they do and what tools and resources we have to nudge them in different directions. I've done that work all over the world, primarily in conflict settings for the first half of my career, working with displaced people in the Middle East, the Horn of Africa, and Afghanistan before I moved back to the US. And so I'll bring forward a little bit of what I've learned from that experience of kind of behavior change communications, since I think that that's really relevant to a lot of the work that we're doing around well-being. And in all of those places that I've worked, I found that there's some remarkable similarities. I've always been focused on youth movements and how to kind of empower the change in social norms that happens naturally as young people come into their own. And there's so many similarities for how people show up around the world. And even in these conflict zones where people are experiencing some of the worst times of their life, after physical safety, a lot of the same things come up everywhere. It's loneliness. It's wanting to be liked by people in your community. It's getting excited for play and for ice cream on a hot summer day. And so the things that actually connect us in community are very, very similar. And that's true in the United States as well. And as we move into the digital environment, some of those very core human functions of social connection, of community support, and of experiencing and expressing your identity. So at Pivotal Ventures, and I will see if I can do visuals here. As I mentioned, we believe in the extraordinary power of young people and how we can kind of support their well-being to unlock their full potential. At Pivotal, we have been very intentional about framing mental health within the broader context of well-being. And that's really important. Mental health is not isolated from other experiences of community, of interpersonal support, and of identity. I love that our founder, Melinda Gates, describes herself as an impatient optimist in that she believes that we're on kind of a positive trajectory, but is impatient for the world that we can achieve. And so really has put the mandate of our organization behind getting there faster. So what we look for a lot in storytelling and in the way that we communicate our own work is painting that aspirational picture. Building off of what Kyra described, it is, I think, very common to see tropes that focus on the negative, that are kind of deficit framing, particularly with kids of color and queer kids, that really focus on kind of, there's a mental health crisis, this generation is lost, here are all of the negative effects that are happening from kids. And that really moves the lens away from focusing on how our systems have failed those kids. So we try and paint a picture and look for organizations who are telling the story of asset-based framing, what can we build, and also how do we correct some of the systemic problems that would bolster our young people. We see this kind of across the board from a visual side as well. When we look at a lot of the news coverage and proposals that come to us as a funder around mental health, it often leads with kind of crisis statistics and then really negative imagery. So we've been very intentional about centering kind of youth faces, caregiver faces that are building towards that, the world that we want to live in, that center well-being, love, and joy, rather than kind of the dark kid alone in the hallway that often comes up around this topic. And so that's something that we emphasize, and is true from a behavior change framework, which is paint the picture of where you want to go, not necessarily where you are. One of the other things that's true in behavior change communication, and I think is relevant for some of the other panelists here today, is to think about the different audiences you're trying to reach in communicating, and to be very clear about segmenting your audiences. So for many folks in the nonprofit space and the youth service space, you may think about your users as your primary audience, the kids that are going to be benefiting from your solution or participating in your program. That actually is a different audience than maybe the adults in their life who may be responsible for getting them into that program, and is a different audience from funders, from other allied kind of decision makers or community members that can help advance your mission. So one of the things that is really important in communicating effectively is to know that you've got different audiences, but to identify shared values that cut across all of them. You don't necessarily have to communicate just that shared value. You're going to have different hooks for each audience, but being mindful of what is a unifying theme versus what is salient only with one audience will help drive a more effective communication strategy. We see a lot of the time focus on screen time and phone use, especially in the connected well-being space. That may resonate with an adult caregiver audience, doesn't resonate with kids, doesn't necessarily resonate with a lot of funders or decision makers because there's not a clear solution or ask for that. Instead, focusing on things that are shared across all of those audiences, like quality sleep, not feeling tired, is something that you can then build into a hook that is specific for each audience, but is a shared value that becomes a narrative that works across each audience. So it makes it a little bit easier to customize how you speak to each group. The final thing that I'll say is as a funder, when we look for organizations that are telling their story, we actually emphasize the things in the orange buckets more than the things on the arrows. Most of what we see folks communicate to us are the things in the arrows. So this is kind of a little bit of a reframe of how we think about storytelling and the change that we'd like to see from organizations who are working with young people. The problem almost always comes up, and we like that to be very specific. What harm is being experienced and for whom, not at a population level, but really what are the demographics of groups that you're looking to work with. The solution is only part of that then. We know that that's really important for how you tell the story of the work that you're doing, but what often is more resonant for us in looking at fundable solutions is what that will mean for an individual or community that has experienced that harm, and how that individual will have a changed experience. That is very often easier told in a qualitative story than in a quantitative story. And I think that there's a lot of emphasis on kind of quantitative data. We love qualitative stories, and that's equally impactful for us. The other thing that we often see missing from kind of storytelling around solutions is what are the systemic barriers that are preventing that solution from kind of rolling out. That maybe it's hard to get into schools. We have kind of teachers that are challenged talking about emotions or mental health. And so then the other thing that we look for is around the business model. How will your organization sustainably be able to address those big systemic barriers? And all of that leads to a story around impact that can be either individual, again, going back to how an individual's lives will change, or the result of a larger systemic change. That can take many different forms, again, qualitative or quantitative, but we look for the overarching lens of well-being and how different pieces are interpreted. And I'll stop there and stop my screen share.
Thanks so much, Kelsey. That was an incredibly clarifying framework. I really loved it. And as a qualitative researcher, especially appreciated your shout out to the qualitative aspect of impact storytelling. So thanks so much for that. Jasbal, you want to go next?
Yes, I don't think I have a choice. I think I have to go next, Mimi. There's a lot in what Kyra and Kelsey shared that really resonates with me and with us. Authentically embracing the voices of young people and doing it, as you said, Kyra, with representation, not tokenization. Kelsey, as you talked about, getting away from crisis framing, you know this, and everybody else can know this. That's something that we're also trying to move towards. It's very easy being squarely in mental health to talk about crisis. As I said, I've been here a year and a half, 2 years at Hope Lab, and I was part of that problem and trap in my first year here, talking about the crisis narrative, which is quite disempowering for people who are affected by many challenges that are out there in the world in the mental health space. So quick story to just ground what we do at Hope Lab. My goddaughter is 24 years old. She just turned 24. She lives in Wisconsin. And this year I had to get her a different present, or I chose to give her a different present. I've given her presents for a quarter century now. And she's now a fourth grade teacher. I am fortunate to be married to a public high school teacher, and she gave me some great ideas about gifts I could give that would be not just work gifts, but something that she'd really enjoy and embrace. And it's a Cricut cutter. It's an expensive gift. If you don't know what a Cricut cutter is, this is not a plug for them. It's spelled C-R-I-C-U-T. If you do, you probably worked in education. And she sent me pictures, after she received it, of her and her students. And she's a fourth grade teacher. So everybody in that room besides her is 9 and 10 years old. And it occurred to me that that's like the bookends for us when we think about young people and their well-being at Hope Lab. And this, I think, is concurrent with some of the work that others in this room, including you, Kelsey, do. 10 to 25, that's our sweet spot. And everybody in that room is sort of part of our user group or customer group, if you will. And it's quite a big spectrum, but there's a lot of possibility in that room. And so for me, just the past month or month and a half since it's been her birthday, that's been really grounding me in thinking about our work. So at Hope Lab, I mentioned that we do work to support young innovators out in the world, and these young innovators who are doing the good work to make things better for people like Jasmine, my goddaughter, and all the students in her class. And that looks a couple different ways. That looks sometimes like grant making to young innovators, and sometimes that looks like investment in startup companies through a venture fund mechanism. So a lot of what we see are pitches from organizations that are looking for money. Often that's a pitch deck. Sometimes it's a video. Sometimes I got one today. Nobody sent a deck over, but they sent me a website. So I looked at a website. Often, and this is really important as you think about your stories that you tell, it's verbal. It's mediated by somebody else, and they say, hey, this is the one that came through today. It was a group called Earkick. It's not a value judgment on who they are. I don't know much about them yet. It's like, you should check out Earkick. They're doing this AI mental health companion. And so that's how it was explained to me. And so that is my mental model of what they do. So just as you think about, like, what I'm talking about is really funding pitches or sometimes partnership pitches. Sometimes it's a deck, but sometimes it's these other pieces. And quite often it's going to be somebody else who is conveying your message that is not you, that's not somebody on your team. And the way I'd love for y'all to think about this, I'll give you 3 things that are mindset, a skill, and a process. So from a mindset perspective, when you're looking to put your story out there for, again, because you're looking for funding or because you're looking for a partnership with a school or with a healthcare system, I'd love for y'all to think about it as a matching problem, not a convincing problem. So the more quickly you can get to clarity about who y'all are and what you do, and again, I reference you back to everything that you just heard from Kelsey, the easier you're going to make it for the person in the group on the other side to determine if there is a match or not. And that's all we're really trying to do. You're not trying to convince us to do something that we wouldn't do otherwise as a funder. You're just trying to help us understand if you are the right fit. I'll give you, got it somewhere here. So I, outside of Hope Lab, advise a company called Birth by Us, and their tagline is the pregnancy and postpartum app for Black women. There's a lot more there. It's pretty concise. They've workshopped that one for a long time. And we could talk about whether it needs to be workshopped more, but it's pretty clear to us at Hope Lab, that's not for us right now. Like, that's just not a fit for what we do, but that's okay because we know, and well, operating systems is not a transaction, right? It can be perceived as a transaction that somebody comes to us with a pitch. We decide it's not for us, and that's the end of the story. Quite often, the way that we operate and the way that many of our peer funders, both grant makers and venture investors, operate is we see opportunities that aren't good for us, but might be good for our peer investors and funders. And the more clear it is, the easier it becomes for us to refer out to somebody else. And same way we get a lot of inbound referrals. So the mindset piece there is just to think about every one of these interactions as a way to get really clear on what you are in order to match with either the folks in front of you or for them to refer you to somebody else who might be a good match. From a skill perspective, it's just to lead with a story, and not a generic story. Something happened about a decade ago where everybody in the world who's an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, founder, entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, the whole set, everybody who was creating something out in the world got the exact same memo that they needed to tell a story. And then what happened was everybody told these stories that vary in their ability to evoke emotion out of their audiences, because I think a lot of them are quite generic and not really rooted in real experiences. So the more you can ground something in a real experience, again, I think it's really important to heed some of the advice that you heard from Kyra about not tokenizing people, and also, sharing your own experience only to the extent that it feels comfortable. That's how you help people understand what you're working on, why you're working on it, why it's important. I'll give you one example. Is we had a pitch that came across recently that had its tagline that was sufficiently clear. Is about student athletes and their mental health. I'm not doing their tagline a favor here. It was very concise and very clear, and we got a good sense of what it was. Their second slide was the About Us slide, which is not normal. Usually that comes at the end if you see a lot of these things. But in this case, that was the story they were telling. They had 3 co-founders, all athletes, 2 who were prior college athletes, NCAA athletes who had their own challenges with mental health. And that was the story they told. And that story was very compelling because it explained why this was an important issue, why these were the absolute right people to work on this. So number 2 is lead with a story. The third is a process one, and that's to just try it out. We at Gobi, the design agency that I led for a number of years, we incubated a social enterprise called CellEd that was aiming to, at that time, provide literacy education on phones for English language learners, adult English language learners here in the US. And we spent a year plus tweaking their deck. You can always, with your stories, with your taglines, with your pitches, it's an endless process. I think you all are quite familiar with that. The most important way that you can move that process forward is to just put things out into the world, not irresponsibly, but put things out into the world, try them out and see how those messages are landing. I'll stop there.
Wow, thanks so much, Jespal. I love, especially like the matching versus convincing, very, very helpful. And I think it's kind of a common theme that we heard from Kyra and Kelsey too, which is like moving away from this kind of extractive, like the solution floats out there somewhere independent of people versus a more relational and networked approach. And that's something that I've really appreciated, working with the group of innovators and funders and storytellers and this initiative. And what we try to support with the Connected Learning Alliance is, there's not like one ring to rule them all. It's, a very differentiated ecosystem of trying to find, the right people, the right beneficiaries, supporters, and partners. And it's a very complex matchmaking process. So if you go into each relationship just not embedding yourself within that broader relational context, then not only are you kind of triggering the sort of responses that you don't want to be triggering to your potential partners and supporters, but you're also missing out on that broader network of support. So I think it's about eating our own dog food in terms of like the connected part of the connected well-being, and really appreciate all 3 of you kind of speaking from your own perspectives around a common set of values. Okay, I think we're all eager to hear from some of our teams here. So I think this Teenage Life is going to go first. So Evelyn and Molly, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Molly. And Evelyn, I was going to point to you, but I realized you're in a square
I'm here
somewhere.
somewhere.
Awesome. We're going to present, and feel free to interrupt us. I'm going to just share some slides, and then I thought maybe we could talk, and they'll take about a minute. And so is it okay if I share my screen, Mimi?
Yeah,
Yes.
go for it.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to start by sharing a little bit about us and a communication success that we've had, and also a communication challenge that we've had. And if you have advice, we'd love it. So basically with teenagers, and now with Evelyn, I work to found an organization called This Teenage Life. and we help young people feel seen and heard and less alone in the world. And we started because I've been a teacher. Now I actually need to change this for 14 years in high schools across the US. And my experience of the loneliness crisis and the youth mental health epidemic has been seeing, these are all drawings made by a teenager who helped to found This Teenage Life, who's now in college, but seeing firsthand what kind of isolation and depression has looked like over the past, I would say now like 5 years. This is kind of constant of loneliness amongst the teenagers worked with, or invisibility, or like lack of real authentic connection, feelings of a lot of body image issues amongst teenage girls and other youth, but especially amongst people who identify as young women, which has been supported by a lot of research, and kind of this like extremely intense desire to connect and want to be vulnerable and reach out, but not feeling like they know how. And also just like a sense of constant overwhelm around the news cycle and around these ongoing crises, whether it be conflict or climate change or whatnot. And so that's why with a group of teenagers, we started a thing called This Teenage Life. I was teaching at a high school in San Diego, and everyone was feeling lonely and had all these big ideas, kind of to what Kelsey was saying, this asset-based approach. I was working with all these young people, a lot of whom identified as queer, and they didn't have spaces to talk about all the big feelings and ideas they were having. And so I was like, why don't we sit around in a circle and have a conversation about these big feelings and ideas? And previously I'd worked at or still to this day, I work at a conflict resolution camp where the half of the camp is sitting in a circle and young people from areas of conflict talking to each other. So we basically did the same thing, but positioned it around storytelling and put a microphone at the center. And if you know anything about audio, you'll know that this is a ridiculous setup to have like people silently sitting, like someone would be like, I can hear you chewing gum. Like we had a big mic at the center, and we would just talk about like when people realized their parents were people too, or loneliness or coming out or whatever it might be. And we recorded it and ultimately released a podcast. And what was so nice is like the microphone kind of worked as a talking stick, and the whole thing kind of felt like a bonfire, but for existential angst and storytelling, and it created a lot of connection. And so we ultimately like made music and art and released this podcast and had like 100 listeners, like 2 of whom are in Nebraska, and we were like stoked. And then the numbers during the pandemic went up and up and up until we've continued doing this for the past 5 years. And now we have people in over 180 countries, which is weird. It's like, isn't there only 189 countries? How did that happen? I don't know. We have hundreds of thousands of listeners and a bunch of different dialogue groups, because what ultimately ended up happening is that all of our listeners started, not all of them, but a lot of them started emailing us. And we started getting these emails during the pandemic. It was actually the first week of the pandemic that I started receiving these kinds of emails. And they were things about how I feel so alone. This helped me feel so seen and heard. And then as I was getting these emails, I was like, we're meeting on a video chat platform. Can't people join? And actually the first group of people to join our initial group were from Kabul. We had 3 girls join from Kabul, and then we had people join from Wisconsin, and then all over India. And it was like this funny thing where it was like, we can all meet over Zoom and hang out. So why don't we do that? We were meeting every day, kind of like during the pandemic. It was kind of insane. And so this person was the person who wrote this email. At the time, she was 11, but said she was 12, which I find extremely charming. Now she's in high school. And she ended up becoming a producer of an episode about divorce, because her parents were getting divorced during the pandemic, which was really beautiful. And we produced episode. A few people in our group, someone had a parent who passed away, and they produced an episode about that, which was really healing for some people in the group. And ultimately, I think what's really powerful about us is kind of like this. What's powerful about what we're doing is basically that young people have the reins. Evelyn and I are the quote unquote like adults who run the thing. And with this approach of having a much more participatory centered experience for young people by young people, where they come up with the ideas, where they drive the dialogue, we basically think that we're creating a platform for authentic connection that doesn't really exist currently. And we're much more like, we have a at scale impact in certain ways, but in other ways, our community is human scale. And therefore we have this lovely way of, I think, fostering authentic connection. So this presentation was all the art was made by a teenager named Chloe Moreno. And the success of this is not that I'm still a teacher. I'm like hiding in the administrator's office at my school right now to talk to you all. Like, I wouldn't say that like now we've raised $10 million to do this work, like because of this amazing communication success. Like, absolutely not. But what was so great is actually I had the incredible good fortune of doing an incubator through Headstream, which is actually funded in large part by Pivotal, or fully by Pivotal. And while we were workshopping how we were going to tell our story, I like suddenly tried to become like, like the head of Uber. I was like, the statistics show this, and actually like, this is our business plan. And I became someone who I totally am not. And David, the head of the head of the whole program was like, what are you doing? Like, this is not you. Like, you need to go back to your roots and like talk about your work. And so like after much workshopping, we finally like were able to talk about who we actually are. And what was so wonderful about being able to share this new way of sharing our story, which was actually just like the true way, was that other people who are in this world really connected to it. And that has led to so many amazing partnerships that we're so grateful for, even if it's not like immense funding or anything per se. The quality of the work and the kind of impact that we're able to have has just gotten so much deeper and so much wider as a result of those partnerships. I think I'm done blabbing. Evelyn, what do you want to add? Would you mind introducing yourself and just sharing a little bit about your experience?
So my name's Evelyn, and I'll actually have to leave in a moment here because I have to go take a final because I'm still in college, which sucks. But I basically got matched with Molly through a program at my school, like, oh gosh, a year and a half ago now. I really love audio. I do like, I'm interested in policy, and I'm an international and public affairs major. And this was just like a stars aligning moment of like, whoa, we're like talking about these really interesting issues about like authenticity and education reform and like media, and also it's all through the vehicle of audio. So it was like a dream for me to join. And since then I've put together multiple international dialogue groups. So I help facilitate groups where basically folks just kind of hop on from all over the world, and we try our best to accommodate like our LA folks where it's like 7 a.m. and like our friend in Malaysia where it's like 11. I don't understand how she stays up that late, but somehow. And yeah, so I've facilitated those groups, and I've taken over most of the production work for the podcast episodes. So all the recording that we get from the Zoom meetings, and also just individual recordings that people send in through our big like WhatsApp group. I stitch those all together in GarageBand, and it's like very DIY and very fun. And yeah, I hope to continue working for this Teenage Life in the future. It's been lovely.
And I was going to say, Evelyn, and I know you have to go in a second, but like, I would say that one of our biggest communication challenges is that like all the teens often joke, like, I even forget this is a podcast sometimes. What it is like a community that happens to produce a podcast that grows the community. But the podcast, in my opinion, is also like really special.
Yeah,
and
to add on to that, it's like, I think so much of the work we do is just adapting to the needs of the teens. So folks are like, yeah, we all meet on WhatsApp. Like, can you not email us? Can you just text us on WhatsApp? So like, then we move over to WhatsApp, and now we have this big WhatsApp group where folks are like sending photos of like celebrations in India and their homework and, the Northern Lights and like crazy stuff, and like communicating daily. And then, we meet on Zoom for the podcast, and then I'm editing and like who's behind the scenes. And it's really like inside of it all makes a lot of sense to us, and it's kind of flexible and ever evolving as the teens come up with more ideas. But Molly and I have struggled to like regurgitate that in a semi-cohesive way to people who aren't like inside our own heads, because it's just us and the teens. So I think that's been our largest communication issue. Like Molly said, it's so much more than a podcast. That's just like the product, I guess. But the process, in my opinion, is far more important and impactful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm just gonna hop off and I'll let
Oh, okay.
Molly
Thanks so much,
answer the
Evelyn.
rest of
The
the questions. Thank
recording
you,
is
everyone.
here for
Yeah.
you after.
Good luck with your
I'll
final.
take a look. Thank you.
Yeah, I love the story, and yeah, it's such an inspiring story, but it's also really different from like the fact that you have a community that's driving content in a particular way. So I can see how it would also be difficult to explain because it's not how media is usually produced. It's different. So I would encourage people to like, if you have any thoughts or feedback on, Molly's presentation or questions, feel free to use the chat. I know everybody's seeking input, so encourage you to engage and foster dialogue through the multiple channels we have on this online format. But I'm going to keep us moving just because our time is limited. And I think that Anna, you're up next to share about Novelly.
Yep, that's me. Hi. I'll just share my screen really quickly. Hopefully that works. No slides, just our actual digital communications work, which I thought would be the best demonstration of everything that I'm talking about. But hello, everyone. My name is Anna Casalme. I use she, her pronouns. I live in San Francisco, which is also where Novelly is based. And Novelly is on a mission to get youth authors published and taught in 8th through 12th grade English classrooms so that every young person has the opportunity to feel seen and inspired by what they read. And I'm sure if there's folks here who were big readers growing up, or even if you weren't, we know that there's a lot of benefits to reading. It's a foundational skill that we use for the rest of our lives. But then there's also all of these other wonderful benefits, right? When you can find a sense of belonging, empathy, perspective taking for experiences that maybe don't relate to your own, creativity, and for some of our students who find themselves most on the margins, feeling less alone. But the problem that we're seeing is that if students can't access this kind of literature, or they aren't able to read it in the first place, we can't find all of these wonderful benefits with reading. So these are some of the books that we've published. A lot of them, the one that I like to highlight some of them, I love this particular one called River of Stars by a student, which is a sapphic retelling of a Chinese folktale that the student heard a lot growing up from their grandparents and also their parents. So this is a little bit of a demonstration of our work, and like we see that it is engaging, right? There's a teacher, an 11th grade English teacher who is in Piedmont, and because she's local, I was able to have a conversation with her, meet some of her students. And she told us that when she taught Year of the Rat, which is one of the pieces in our library, which was a piece that a student wrote in response to anti-Asian hate during the pandemic. And the teacher told us that when she did that lesson and dedicated a full lesson to that book, every single one of her students raised their hands and wanted to participate and had something to say. So we know that it works when you find a story that moves you, that makes you feel seen. You want to show up, you want to engage, you care. And I think that in this backdrop of book censorship that we're seeing in schools, we're seeing disengagement continuing from the effects of the pandemic. We believe that we need more literature in these classrooms, not less, and particularly literature that's highlighting youth voices that are by diverse youth authors. And that by doing so, we can create spaces where students are not only engaged and care about what they're reading, but also become the experts who have something to say. So that's a little bit about what we do. I think we're huge fans of This Teenage Life, obviously. I think something that is an inherent strength, right, is that youth storytelling tells a great story, and the impact, this library, these are like the heart and soul is poured into these works of literature, and you can really feel it. And so I think that's a success that we've had for the past few years. So like focusing on youth voice, I think Molly and her team really touched on this as well. We get emails, we hear the impact, and I think that's a strength. So a quote that I can highlight is one that came out in our newsletter, which you can see right here. Reading these books completely opened my mind to new ideas, perspectives, and stories I never would have known about without reading these books. They help us develop empathy, gain knowledge that might be unattainable to us, see figures we relate to, and give us the power to speak our truth and fight for what we believe is right. And this is something I hope more students get to experience. And so when we're able to highlight the literature, we are able to recruit students to get published for our youth authorship program, and also recruit teachers who are interested in teaching this literature in their English classrooms. And so one of the ways that we have figured out we can best do that is through partnerships. So one of our most successful partnerships is with National Novel Writing Month. So they've been partners with us for the past year. And this is an example of a webinar that we did for their Young Writers program, which reaches 10,000 educators across the United States. And by putting these 3 young authors who have written really cool books and have them talk about their stories, talk about their joy while writing, has been a very natural fit and a very powerful way to engage with NaNoWriMo's Young Writers program and support their educators in engaging their students with writing during the month of November. So that's a success that we've had, is really focusing on recruiting youth authors, recruiting teachers through partnerships with organizations like National Novel Writing Month, and creating content and partnerships that put youth voices at the center and really highlight their stories and let them speak for themselves. Because, you know, when you say that, like one of the books, like Chase right here in the middle, his book is a dystopian novella about an Asian American boy who's forcibly put into a camp during the COVID-19 pandemic and escapes. Or Isla's here on the left, hers is a magical realism novella about a young girl who travels between different dimensions and is forced to confront extreme climate events in both of her worlds. And then we have Ace on the far right, who wrote a fantasy novella about a princess living a double life, and that thoughtfully includes representation of Black, albino, and LGBTQ+ characters. And so that is how we have successfully been able to find, as one of our former interns would say all the time, find the girlies that get it and the girlies that don't get it, and it's fine. And I just love her saying that, because it's true, like the girlies that get it. And when we put it out there and people are able to, particularly students and teachers, are able to read this, and it just clicks for them. On the flip side, though, the challenge that I would say that we've had is when you have a really small team and limited time and resources, how storytelling and this work that we're doing can be used as a fundraising strategy, right? And so finding individual donors, finding institutional giving, and finding that same match, like we said earlier, the girlies that get it, I think is where that's more of a mystery to us. And something like an example that I can give is we received a check out of the blue from a woman in San Francisco who's an author, and said she found us through Instagram and like loved the work. But I think, again, like the not knowing how to find those people more through our storytelling and like content. And then the second person that I can think of who also found us through research, and he is someone who he shortlists organizations and is a contractor with different foundations. And these are invite-only foundations, and he'll prospect, I guess is his role. And he said he also found us through social media, and I just and love the work, and I would love to find more of these people. But I think, again, the challenge comes down to like, okay, we have a really clear idea of the kinds of students and 8th through 12th grade English teachers that we're looking for, but with donors and institutional funders, how can we find that best match with like limited time and resources? So yeah, that's a little bit about Novely.
Thanks so much, Anna. That yeah, it's amazing just to see how both of y'all have gotten so much traction among youth, organic traction, which is really powerful. But then, yeah, the question of how do you convince the grown-up world of the value, that's a challenge that really resonates in some of the broader context that we heard early on. Okay, I think Nana's been waiting patiently and we're really eager to hear from you. So I'll let you go next.
Yeah, it's so good to hear from Anna and also Molly. I'm grateful to be a part of the Impact Studio, especially just to hear from their experience and just be able to build community. It's really inspiring. Yeah, I'm Nana Boateng. I'm a curriculum and learning manager with TeachYR, which is a part of YR Media. And a lot of the work that we do is to uplift media education through learning resources that focuses on identity, belonging, and equity in schools and on site at our hubs in Oakland and Chicago. So I'll share my screen to show some images. There we go. Cool. Okay, awesome. So just to show with like the concentric circles, how we actually do that work is by centering youth. And I think like from all of the Impact Studio folks, like that is the root of why this work is really important. For us, it really helps us give direction not only to our educators, but to our teams, to our team when it comes to responding to our student needs and making sure that we're accurately representing their stories for a larger audience and making sure they're drivers of their stories rather than us just placing resources in front of them and saying, you know, we're adding you at the tail end. So I would say a major success for our team is the way we facilitate the co-collaboration between our youth and educators to affirm belonging and provide direct support. And that looks like developing curriculum and workshops that center youth expertise and accurately centers our youth-reported media as anchor text, which we've seen has been really helpful to make the learning spaces that they're in feel a little bit more humanizing and culturally sustaining. Our TeachYR content and curriculum has like reached about 800 students nationwide through some of our teacher partnerships and also through just like our distribution in our newsletter. And it's always really great to just hear directly from our educators the impact of that. A few educators have reached out to share with us that the resources that centered YR Media stories really felt relatable, and it felt like the students were gaining like genuine and solid advice from other students who had experienced these things. Also, they shared, I just have seen them really light up and get excited, which makes the learning feel more fun for them and also the teachers. So these successes come from being able to just invite students to share their work, their voices, and their realities while showing them that they can be storytellers themselves, which is a really cool part of the work that I get to do. Just getting to see our students, feel like they can publish and feel like they're making a big impact too by just sharing their voices. But yeah, this work is really important because it's validating for both our educators and our students. It helps them feel more present in their learning because it pushes beyond just submitting work for a grade. Students are thinking critically and reflecting on ways to take action in their community, and it gives them a space to be curious and ask critical questions and build bridges of understanding rather than, feel like they have to succumb to misinformation that they might encounter online. So these are just to start off at the top. At the end of this year, we published our TeachYR report, a year of Teachable Moments. Teachable Moments was a 2-year program that we did where we worked directly with educators, I think a cohort of 10 educators, to do the co-development of curriculum that was centering identity, wellness, and also, our student voices. And so this just kind of is a framework that we shared out to talk a little bit more in depth about our successes and challenges that we encountered that I'll just share in the chat. But a few of the student quotes that I just wanted to pull out were from our youth advisors who got to participate directly with giving feedback, developing resources to pair with the curriculum that our educators put out. And it was just like a really cool experience to hear them just share out right off the bat. Many of the topics that the educators were engaging with felt really intriguing, and it was clear that there was a focus on student voices and personal self-growth and reflection. Another youth advisor shared that it felt like our educators made an effort to actually get resources that were reflective of their population. So there's a lot of work that we do as a team to be really intentional about that, and making sure that, again, we are reviewing the content that our educators are putting out and what our students want to see and center. So some of the pieces that I put on the slide as well are coming from our youth advisors. I think it's really encouraging after many of them reviewed and were a part of the curriculum building process. They themselves wanted to write and publish and feature some of their pieces on our YR Media site. And I just think that's like just a really great example of the influence that a lot of this work has had. Some of our students were already youth contributors who wanted to just see the backside of what it could look like to share their voices through curriculum design too. But I'll also just like give context as well that about like workshops that we've like helped to develop alongside our students. This summer into September, we collected our youth media projects that were developed from the Teachable Moments curriculum project. So we gathered the pieces that students developed in their classroom to feature in an online gallery, and also highlighted in a student showcase called Creating Waves, Media Making for Ed Equity, to just show the great work that was being done in the classroom that really highlighted student voices. And so that was really cool to see because a lot of our student contributors, a lot of them didn't really expect that that could be an outcome to their learning, where they could create a podcast or write a personal narrative that really reflected why certain issues they were learning in their classroom mattered. So these are our curriculum examples from our educators. And these are resources that, again, were co-developed alongside with our youth, and it culminated in an online repository of lessons that fit within a similar how-to format with clear activities that were adaptable and can be adaptable to any learning space. But a major challenge that we were realizing, especially with the population that we've been sending out our content to, was that not a lot of our educators felt like they were getting institutional support and backing to lead these activities, even though the resources felt really aligned and exciting. Some of our partners weren't always given the same flexibility and support or guidance to implement the resources, like the cohort of educators we were able to work directly with to develop them. I know I've heard from a few educators via email or through some of our focus groups that sometimes it's just not aligned with like core standards, or it doesn't feel as if they can go against traditional structures in their school system. And so that makes it feel really hard. I know one of our educators shared with me that because they couldn't implement a project in their during school hours, they were working towards finding a way to bring it into like an after school activity. But I think it's also really important to note that like media education should be at the forefront of our learning, because so much of the ways our students are processing are not only online, but it's through new technology, and it's through writing and finding their voice in storytelling. So yeah, that is something that we have been trying to figure out how to better support, even though it can be an obstacle. Yeah, I just want to wrap up and just show some of our student quotes just about their experience. So again, we were able to host the student showcase, and as we were like reaching out to students to encourage them to just check if they're going to participate with us, it was just like really cool to get their feedback, or even just get them sharing about like, oh, I never thought someone would take my voice seriously. I wrote this little poem and I didn't think it could be like someone would pay attention to it. And I think for us, like, it isn't just something that's little, it's something that does have an impact for a larger community. It was also really great to hear a student just feel as if they were being seen as an expert in their learning. So yeah, that's all I'll share. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Nana. I love seeing some of the details of the work you're doing, especially alongside Kyra's presentation earlier. And, you know, it really speaks to, I think, some of what Kelsey was describing as the segmentation work and the kind of careful craft work that has to happen to convince the grown-up world, not just the educators, but the institutional decision makers that sit behind the educators, and the amount of curation and supporting materials that you all are developing. Like with YR is sort of a larger capacity organization, you know, one of the most established brands within the youth media space. You all have the capacity to do that kind of segmentation in a way that, you know, is really important and field defining. So I really appreciate you doing this work and sharing. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes, and I think we do want to create some space for smaller conversations with folks who are able to stick around a little bit longer. So we're going to create breakout groups for each team. And I think everybody can just self-select. If it turns really unbalanced, we can merge, but I'm guessing that it'll all work out.